I mean, you want to be able to get your Uber Eats pretty easily. I just finished a house that has this like lovely courtyard to the street, and the owners call it their Uber Eats courtyard because they kind of like stick a big kind of stick out across the footpath with a hook and pick up their bag of Uber Eats when it's lockdown time straight into the courtyard. They've sent me a few photos and that's quite funny.
The Art of Living, a podcast for Brickworks building products, presented by Tim Ross.
Australia is currently going through a design boom when it comes to residential architecture. In this new podcast series, I talk to some of the country's best architects to find out how our views on what and where we build has changed. What do we need and want from our houses today? And ultimately, I ask the question, what makes a house a home? G'day, it's good to have you with me for this fantastic conversation with Brisbane architect John Ellway, or Jellway as he's commonly known. After recently setting up his own shop, Jellway has won a swag of awards for his house designs that have definitely made their mark on the suburbs of Brisbane. I kicked off this chat with the talented architect by asking him what defines Brisbane architecture today.
And it probably doesn't just apply to Brisbane, but I think I'm also, after having a kid recently, I've got more of a perspective on this. And I think people just want houses that are easy to keep clean and stuff where you can... places where you can, like hide half of the house away when friends come over. So that's one of the big things I always try to do. Oh, it's true. It's just practical.
I just really tried to make a house it's easy to keep clean, but you're dealing with real life, hiding things away in cupboards and keep things clean.
Absolutely, and I think the Rona changed things a bit for people working from home, but I had that kind of creep into my projects a fair bit before then, and I think a lot of them were people like young families wanting to work a few days extra from home with a young kid to support their other half, and they need a bit of space still to do their work and pop out for 2 or 3 hours. And I mean that was my own case here. So I built a little kind of studio in the backyard, and I've done that on 2 successive projects. One where we built like a granny flat that parents can come from overseas and stay at for part of the time, and then the rest of the time that one of the couple can work from home. Or there's another house at Woolloongabba I've done where we built a shed, just a simple little lean-to out the back, and the fella there has his office out the back in the shed. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a theme of people wanting to be able to adapt their houses, and change as well when they have kids, or maybe if kids leave home or whatever.
I mean, traditionally people haven't thought about that. They sort of think about it, but then it's like, I just want stuff. Do you think
I think there's a lot of people I think people probably used to more so kind of sell their house and move to the next thing and keep kind of going up in scale. But, it's expensive buying houses, and I think people my hope is that they're starting to stick around and stay in the house that they're in and just make improvements and be happy to live there. But that requires, adapting to lifestyle changes and changes through their life.
I mean, are people prepared, do you think, to take smaller spaces or make compromises for better design or a better area or a more thoughtful house?
I think so. And I think the way I tackle that is I bring clients to my own house a couple of meetings in. And it's pretty small. It's like 105 square meters inside. And people come in and they're like, oh, it doesn't feel anything like that. It's like not far off the size of an apartment really. But they see that and go, oh, okay. So our budget, if we do something slightly smaller, we can, spend more money in a few different places. and size being that real thing to keep budget under control, and people kind of identify with that and go for it. So that's worked really well.
How do you find your house to live in?
It can feel a little bit like you're on holiday sometimes. Like you feel like you're in a place that you feel really comfortable, and I don't know, I think it's that it just has so much opening to landscape, and that you can kind of walk outside and upstairs, and back down again, and get a sense of like what's going on for the day. Is it hot, cold? Is it raining? Because just to explain, the set of stairs that you go from upstairs to downstairs is out the front. And it seems like a scary thing that you might not want to do, but clients come to visit and they kind of see it work, and they go, oh yeah, let's do that. So that's something that's really good.
I suppose it's one of the things that, I noticed over the last sort of 8-9 years of going to Queensland a lot more and visiting a bunch of different houses, that initially, being someone from the southern states and originally from Victoria, those ideas of their sort of outdoor spaces and, going from one pavilion to another, or a much more outdoor way of living that's not just a patio with a barbecue on it, can be a bit confronting. But then when you're there in the climate, it makes complete sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think you've got to design around having backup options, whether it's another set of stairs somewhere else, or the ability to close down at certain times of the year. If you've got to go into it with adaptability, and then that becomes like way more comfortable for clients that might be kind of sitting on the edge about whether they want to go that way or not. Yeah.
But it also gives you an advantage of an architecture that seems particularly Brisbane in that way. It seems unique, and it also, I suppose, it seems so interesting. I think that's one of the reasons it makes Brisbane architecture so interesting, is this reaction to climate.
And I think it's definitely not something you might not want to be doing it or up at Cairns or Townsville. Like that's, you've really got to probably deal with aircon a little bit more up there realistically. And then down south, you probably can't do the same thing. But I think in all of those contexts, you can still kind of create openings and windows and so forth that connect to landscape. And connecting out to the landscape and the neighbourhood means that you can make the house a little bit smaller, build less. And to me, that's true sustainability, is building less stuff and relying on that outdoor space, whether you're like open to it or just looking through to something, that and bringing that inside makes any space feel larger.
When you've got potential clients coming to see you, what are they saying to you that they want from their home?
They're definitely wanting spaces for separation, as I guess we talked about a little bit before. I'm finding people want something that I guess is a little bit more timeless and doesn't date, is what I'm finding. And I think that's a really, really lovely thing to hear from people. So, designing buildings that aren't kind of material rich and so almost like, terrible word, trendy. They want something that it's not going to date in 10 years and it lets their stuff be the thing in the house that's important. Bit of furniture that they've bought that they love, or stuff that they've accumulated when they're traveling, and books and so forth. And let that be the thing that people focus on rather than what things look like so much, which I think is really good.
Are there specific things that people are asking for that they perhaps weren't 18 months ago?
Oh, the Zoom room, hey? I'd like a green background, please, so I can put my favorite holiday destination in the back. Yeah, I think multiple workspaces is a real kind of pandemic thing that's come along. So you usually got 2 adults in the house, perhaps more if it's a share house. Like imagine 6 uni students. They're probably not going to come to an architect, but in a family, you've at least got 2 adults there kind of wanting separate spaces at each end of the house, and trying to keep those spaces out of the bedroom and maybe even out of the lounge room, so there's a little bit of a distinction between work and after 5 p.m. sort of thing. So that's definitely something that's come up a bit.
And-
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that this idea that you've got a much more, the home office is not something that's thrown down the back or to the side or as an afterthought. It can be top of mind. Do you think that sort of will stay, or is it all about do some people just want a little bit more space where perhaps you can disappear and still be able to work at the kitchen table, in the lounge room, or even in the backyard?
I think all that I've said about wanting to open up a house and connect out, people want the opposite of that at certain times of the day or certain times of the year. So you've got to really design where you can kind of shut down and make really kind of, cozy spaces, in the middle of winter or watching TV or on your iPad or something like that. So you've got to cater for both extremes. And I think if you're doing that and creating little separate areas and little nooks, even for young kids to do their homework or whatever, people want those cozy spaces as well.
This is The Art of Living. For more fresh and inspiring architectural content, head to the Brickworks website. What about in terms of how people want to live, in terms of the house that's flexible for entertaining? What do people want from their homes today in that way? What do you think? People in Brisbane, what is it?
I mean, you want to be able to get your Uber Eats pretty easily, don't you? I just finished a house that has this like lovely courtyard to the street, and the owners call it their Uber Eats courtyard because they kind of like stick a big kind of stick out across the footpath with a hook and pick up their bag of Uber Eats when it's lockdown time straight into the courtyard. They've sent me a few photos of that. It's quite funny.
Well, you see a return of the motel style hatch.
Exactly.
So you just knock on the door and put it through. I still remember watching TV and the Uber Eats guy, instead of knocking on the door, I got these sash windows, and he put quite low sash windows, and he actually put his head straight in the window to deliver me my bag because he didn't want to knock on the door by walking an extra metre.
But he just slid it across the floor, didn't he?
Well, but they are. It's a significant change to the way that we eat in a small period of time, and no one really thinks about. Not that you should have to, because you're not going to design your house around Uber Eats, but we didn't eat that way 10 years ago, did we?
No, it was just Domino's back then or whatever. Yeah, and I guess a similar thing with like deliveries of like, supermarket food as well. People kind of want places where you can drop stuff, and, ordering things on the internet, you get packages all the time. So it's something that I haven't really tackled yet, but I think it's something that people are going to want drop points in their houses,
Yeah, I mean, it's otherwise we've all got a Bunnings table out the front for people to leave things on.
Exactly.
And then we're going to have our own brotherhood type, charity bin type doors that people can just like a slot for people to leave things through. And then everything will change, and then the drones will put them straight into your backyard, and then people go, what's that? What's that weird sort of huge mailbox thing that you've got in your front? Oh, that's for when we used to, Mum had a bit of an Amazon addiction back in 2000 and whatever, but
Now we just have a skylight and they drop it in.
You drop it in, or the robots go and pick them up or something. You mentioned that people don't have as much money to spend in Brisbane. Do you think there's a chance of a design-led solution to housing affordability?
Yeah, definitely. Like I quite enjoy. I shouldn't really say this, but I quite enjoy projects that don't have big budgets. Like, you have to work so hard, and it's where you get quite, better solutions, I think, where you're trying to do a lot with less. There's a house, a pair of houses that I finished recently called the twin houses, twin because they're identical. And that whole project was about trying to do low-cost housing. So we had a block of land that was subdivided and two identical houses, and that was part of the cost efficiency, was doing two at once. But also, thinking through like what do volume house builders do, with pine framing and so forth, prefabbed off site, and not having too much scaffolding, and using whole sheets of material that don't get cut up and half of it put in a skip bin. Just trying to like be really succinct with materials and the building methodology, and working hard with the builder and the engineer to get there, like one concrete pour. But these houses are also kind of affordable because we really worked hard to work out what's the minimum amount perhaps a family needs to live. 3 bedrooms, a living space, little area to do some work, and let's build that. But let's think about like how the next person might use it. And so we made downstairs the right size, height-wise, that you could stick in a big kind of rumpus room, or an office to the street, and another bedroom and a bathroom. So giving people the ability to keep adding to their house over time as they might have more money, and trying to start with the base that's enough to get by.
I mean, that was
pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that was quite a common thing when I was a kid, that there was all, the houses were designed, if you wanted to it was quite easy to put another room on. But we want everything in a hurry. We don't want to wait for that stuff so much anymore. But if we are prepared to realise that our lives change and things how we imagine things happening in 5 years' time. I mean, your process of talking to your clients, do you talk to them about how long they want to live in the house and how they want it to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, probably like half the time they've got kids that are around 4 or 5. And so, yeah, it can be hard to tease out of them of like, these kids are going to be teenagers. What do we want a different way for them to come in? Do they need a like their own little back door, or how far away from them do you want to be? At the moment, you want to be pretty close so you can get up during the night, but in a few years, you're not going to want to hear a thing. So, yeah, really teasing out what the future is. And it takes a little while sometimes to get people to think that far ahead. But you want the work that you're doing for them and the bit of building that you're making to actually last a while, and them not move on and buy something else. I've been thinking about, I guess, similar to the houses I was talking about, and is how can you do that sort of thing with apartments as well? And that's kind of a project I'd like to do in the future, is can you make a shell that people can just, have a simple little bed sit and a kitchenette in while they're like quite young. Maybe they're, single and buying it by themselves, but over time keep adding to the unit. And it's something that there's a fair bit of that goes on over in Europe, I think. I used to work at IKEA when I was young, and they'd sell kitchens that you could kind of like move into a space and take with you. And I never quite understood why it was like that until I lived over there. And so you'd often rent little apartments that were just a shell with some, taps hanging out the wall, and you had to bring your own kitchen. So I think there's got to be a model for something along those lines, where people can have something with not much money that they own, and then over time keep adding to it.
I think that's so wonderful, because then a lot of the time you walk into something, everything's a compromise then. So I think compromises are fine if you can choose the compromise, but rather than saying, I don't really like the way this kitchen looks.
Definitely.
It's got
and people get invested in all their decisions then, and then they probably don't want to move on. And so you get people staying around a lot longer and becoming part of that neighborhood and staying there and making wider relationships probably beyond the building, but also with the other people in the building. So yeah, that's a kind of something I'd like to look at down the future.
I mean, it is hard though, isn't it? Because so much of the apartment, it's driven by obviously the developers, but also driven by investors, and investors don't want a shell, do they? They want it all done and dusted and all sorted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main driver is banks in all of this. Can you get a loan for that sort of a situation? Is the bank going to give you the cash? And probably not. So that's that's the hurdle that you got to kind of work out, get it banks comfortable with that sort of setup, I think. And maybe that's by like making the more public spaces of that kind of set of shell of apartments like really lovely, like have a common kitchen and landscape and gardens and access ways and stairs that are really refined and beautiful, and that's what the bank sees initial value in, and then let people go for it.
There's a huge the involvement of garden, greenery and green space in your work. Where does that come from? Where's that passion come from?
It didn't come from me as a child, that's for sure. I remember when I was young going to nurseries with mum and dad, and I would just stomp my feet. I hated it. But gardening was their kind of thing of relaxation on the weekends. And it's funny how when you become older, you end up being like your parents. And I think it's our house was really an experiment in wanting to learn about landscape and like what worked and didn't work. And we've probably planted a lot of it a couple of times now, just to learn about different types of plants. And I used to work with James Russell, and he has a very strong relationship with landscape in his work as well. And so that was, a big influence on wanting to keep, identifying with that as a real positive in the way you live. But yeah, I think just different projects lend themselves particularly in that way. And yeah.
I suppose there's a softness to the greenery, isn't it? And there's a lushness to it that I certainly in the imagery of your projects, that it creates a romance about your work, which I suppose is what people want from their homes at the moment, don't they? I suppose they always have, but right now, in terms of a sanctuary and a place that can connect you with nature, there's something so evocative about your work, I think.
Yeah, and I think the beautiful thing about landscape is it captures light really well as well. So, shadows in the morning and afternoon and sun coming through leaves, and it can really change how a space feels from morning to night and season to season as well. It's kind of using it as a beautiful tool to make the space that you live in feel varied and not the same the whole time as well. That's what I quite enjoy about it. And I guess part of the process with clients is landscape takes time, and so over that design period, you've got to prepare them that the house is going to change in the first year, and maybe the next year and the year after. And that's the exciting thing about the project, is that you don't really know what you're going to get until a couple of years in as well, when you rely heavily on landscape. And I think people enjoy that things are going to keep changing.
Yeah, I mean, you see it with planting, don't you, where people they want mature trees and want it now, whereas, planting something little and watching it grow, it's a very old person's thing to love, like the noise of birds, but it does give you a lot of joy. How would you describe your relationship with your clients and how it evolves over time?
You have to spend a fair amount of time with them, gaining their trust, and it doesn't always come straight away, and often you don't get it until you're on site. And I think on site is where the magic happens. Just the little decisions and being their buffer with the builder and helping kind of translate what's going on. I like to have quite friendly relationships with clients. Like, I think you want to come away from it wanting to kind of have a drink and dinner with them at the end of the project, not the opposite. And it's really just about chatting and talking through and letting them make a lot of decisions as well, but kind of guiding them to the direction that's going to be beneficial. But also, we play a little bit of playing a little bit of football, really. Like, I'll have a yellow card or a red card that we can pull out, and maybe everyone gets a couple, so you can really veto things when you need to.
I'm definitely not doing that. No,
definitely. But you can only do it 3 times. So,
I mean, you don't always have the answers, and I suppose the collaborative effect of someone's home is what makes the best ones work, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you don't know, you're just not going to know enough about them by the first couple of meetings to make total decisions and come up with what's right. So you've got to be open to making slight adjustments as you go along. The house that I did at Paddington recently, the one that got the Houses Awards, was I didn't realise that Sarah, the client, had a massive phobia of cockroaches and big flying insects. So during the middle of the project, we had to come up with this way to do a more kind of heavy-handed, insect screening. But having a builder that was open to making some changes there and working with them, we came up with a solution. So, yeah, it's just not closing the book different points in the project and keep on adapting and making it better.
So your other houses, of course, have cockroaches, but this one particularly.
These guys got a special cockroach-free clause at the end. Yeah,
your project's been documented and published widely. Not just yourself, but you've made your own home very public as well. People have probably been madly Googling it as we go through this conversation. How is that not to have your own house on show, but for your clients to have their house on show in the same way?
Yeah, I guess 9 times out of 10, I'm finding that clients are really proud of the outcome and want to celebrate it at the end by the taking of the photos and putting it somewhere in a magazine or so forth. I found that most clients to be pretty happy with that. Like, they're really proud of the process and the outcome. So that's been really good. I haven't actually had a client that's like super anti publishing, which has been lovely.
I mean, it's nice because you sometimes hear those stories from architects and they go, oh, gosh, you should see the ones that we're not allowed to show you. And they go, show me. I want to see those projects.
Please. I'm sure it's going to happen. But, again, it's that kind of relationship with clients, I think.
Yeah, you've got a huge to-do list. The final question I have for you on your to-do list for this podcast is, it's a really simple question that I've been asking everyone, is what do you think makes a house a home?
I think that's fundamentally giving people space for their own stuff, to let their life be the focus of the house, not the house so much. And letting the house and the spaces recede and let their stuff and landscape come to the fore. I think that's a really lovely way to do it. And you know what that does, I think, the most is it means the house doesn't date, and it means they're not going to kind of rip out finishes and walls and keep it for a long time, hopefully. And that's probably true sustainability, I think.
Mate, that's a wonderfully succinct answer, and it sort of sums up your generosity as an architect and a person, because you essentially letting their own personalities and nature take control of the environment, which is a really delightful thing to hear, mate.
Thank you. It's been good chatting to you.
Good to chat, John.
You've been listening to The Art of Living, a podcast series presented by Brickworks Building Products.